Hello team, this is another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a hot take on the New Hampshire primaries, where particularly the Republican primary, where Donald Trump has beaten Nikki Haley, the moderate Republican, Trump, the kind of MAGA Republican, beating Nikki Haley fairly convincingly by 11 percentage points, or a little bit over that. It's an interesting gap between the two because it's just enough to keep Nikki Haley in a race. Possibly it's going to depend on her funders, right, her donors, and whether they will be happy to keep investing in her campaign, given that it's certain that Trump's going to win. But it's giving a voice to moderate Republicans, and I think it's possibly important for her to do that, and to also provide an alternative narrative to Trump's narrative. But it's that area where if she had been like 5% closer, she's within 5% of Trump, then yep, keep in there. If she'd been 15%, then yeah, no, but 11%, you're thinking, oh, is it worth it? Don't I? Well, she's at the moment saying that she'll continue. During his victory speech, unfortunately, because I think this is just, again, well, it's typical, but, Trump called Haley an imposter who had been beaten so badly. There's no kind of, magnanimity in winning. It's all kind of like, you're a loser, whatever. Nikki Haley has vowed to fight on, and she goes next to South Carolina, which is her own state. She was governor there. However, I believe the Republican governor there has actually endorsed Donald Trump. And it's looking harder for her in South Carolina than in New Hampshire. Now, New Hampshire's a bit funky, and lots of different people can vote independents, and people can, registered Democrats, I think, can go out and vote for Haley. And I think there's a proportion of her vote that was people trying to mix things up in New Hampshire. And so actually, as far as like registered Republicans are concerned, you might have a larger gap in reality between Trump and Haley. Now, what does this all mean? Here is actually, let's go and look at a few takeaways from CNN, just to see what they have to say in general. Some talking points. So Trump wants Haley out now. So Trump just wants to be the only one in the race. And I wonder if, it's good to keep Haley in there. Just, it's good for democracy, maybe good for representation. Keep as I say, the narrative alive that there are other ways of being a Republican than Trump. Haley says her race is far from over, as mentioned. Haley's argument back is that Trump's a loser, and I think she's kind of got to do that. She's got to stand strong on an anti-Trump platform to see. I mean, it would just be really interesting over several states how much the anti-Trump vote is, what that's worth in terms of the Republicans. Are there many Republicans that are willing to stand against Trump? And then what's the $1 million question is, how many of those would then just switch back to Trump if Haley dropped out, and how many would be never Trumpers? So that's an interesting question. Now, going forward, Trump is, notwithstanding the legal issues he is in, is clearly going to be the eventual winner. And it's also fairly stark when for an alternative to Trump, when so many lawmakers and established politicians publicly endorse Trump. And I think there's a lot of kowtowing to the base here. So there are almost certainly, and we've heard this, when we've heard about Republican senators and lawmakers in general have, meetings or meals where Trump comes in all applauding him, and then when he leaves the room, there's laughter afterwards, and there are these stories that you hear that there are an awful lot of Republican politicians who do not like Trump, but know that that's their only ticket for sustained support from their base. And it's a risk going out on a limb and being anti-Trump. Chris Christie garnered about sort of 10% of the vote there or thereabouts, maybe a little bit more. And I actually, I really liked what he had to say. And I'm obviously no Republican, but I think he was honest about that. And I think Nikki Haley's got to decide if she does stay in a race, whether she really goes down the anti-Trump platform or tries to campaign against Trump, but not being anti-Trump, being anti-Trump where it's politically expedient to do so. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see where her messaging goes. Now, going forward, I think this is, and as it says here, there are warning signs for Trump here. And my opinion is that you are more likely than not to get a Democrat win in 2024, November 2024. And here's for why. And I talked about this, although I think it's an extra video that hasn't yet come out. Here's for why. First of all, you look at the form of votes from basically the repealing of Roe v. Wade. So where the Supreme Court said they rolled back that piece of legislation that was federal kind of support for reproductive rights and said, right, states can make those decisions. And as a result, many states had ready and waiting pieces of legislation that outlawed abortion there and then, and it's become very much a postcode lottery, as we'd say in the UK, a zip code lottery in the US as to what reproductive rights you are entitled to. And as a result, there's an awful lot of people who have been up in arms about that, and there's been an awful lot of support for repealing that kind of legislation. You've got a lot of women who are not happy with that, and that's translated into a series of losses for Trump or Trumpism at the ballot box, where abortion's been on the ballot. Now, if the Democrats campaign on that as a large component of their strategy, then they've got a good chance of winning, because actually it is broadly popular across the electorate. I know there's an awful lot of loud shouting about abortion and pro-life positioning, but those who shout the loudest aren't necessarily the most numerous. And it turns out that actually Roe v. Wade has been a shot in the foot for the Republicans, and they have lost a number of particular special elections and, policy referenda and so on account of that. And so that's going to be interesting going forward. But I talked about in a video that, as I say, is yet to come out, that you fight over the middle ground, specifically in a two-party system. So in the UK, we used to have Conservatives and Labour. Lib Dems weren't really in it. So we're a two-party system. And, Tony Blair got in a landslide. How did he get voted in? Well, actually, he looked at what Bill Clinton did in the US, where he went around and did focus groups with the centre ground, with the swing voters. Because basically, as it is in the UK, as it traditionally used to be in the UK, if you're the Labour Party on the left, you're thinking, right, we're going to keep those on the far left. They're going to vote for us no matter what, because they're never going to vote Tory. So we just need to attract the centre ground. So you'd be campaigning for the centre. And likewise with the Tories, they say, well, our far right's never going to vote for Labour. So we just need to, we've got them in the bag. We need to get those swing voters out in the middle. And that's what Tony Blair did in that 1997 election, landslide victory. Bill Clinton had gone around to focus groups and said, right, what do you want to vote for? What interests you? And he, as far as I understand it, created a manifesto out of focus groups, out of swing voters, which is like, these are the people that are going to swing the election one way or the other. So we give them what they want, then we'll get in. Rather than, here's our manifesto, which is born out of our political ideology, and we are going to deliver that to you. And if you like that, you'll vote for it. And if you don't like it, you'll vote for them. But of course, that's quite high risk, because you don't really know necessarily where those swing voters are going to sit. going to the swing voters and getting them to dictate your manifesto, and then getting into power and then possibly changing or reneging on that manifesto is a more canny way of doing things. Tony Blair did that. But then what happened in the UK in the UK political landscape is that the Green Party started becoming more popular, Lib Dems a little bit, local or national parties like the Welsh Plaid Cymru and the Scottish National Party, and then you had the in the 2016 coming up to the 2016 election, you had UKIP that was hard on Brexit, and so you then had more representation of people. And so when Labour then said, well, if we go to the middle ground, we're never going to lose our hard left. Actually, they can now lose their hard left to the Greens, even to Plaid Cymru and the SNP. So they're caught, right? And then the Conservative Party were like, well, if we go to the centre ground, then we'll lose our hard right to UKIP, or now the Reform Party. And so it's fragmented in the UK, which is better for the electorate because it is more represented. There's more likely a party that better represents you, given that there is a multiplicity of parties, than, say, the US, where you've got just the two-party system. Now, in the two-party system in the US, which is a narrowest form of democracy, and a first past the post voting system, it is challenging, right? Democratically speaking, in my opinion, I don't think it's particularly fair, and people aren't represented. But what this means going forward is that both parties need to fight over the centre ground, especially when something like abortion is concerned. And Trump knows that about abortion. He's quite guarded on abortion compared to other things, right? He's hard on the border. But on abortion, actually, he's a little bit funky. He's got no views on abortion. He's not pro-life. Goodness me, I think I wrote an article back in 2016 on him having had 5 views on abortion in like one day or in a short period of time. He doesn't have strong views on that, but he will say what he thinks needs to be said. And that's the same with a lot of his politics, I think. I think he's more of an empty vessel, so stuff that comes out is either like intuitive or born out of what. So sometimes he's like off the cuff without thinking, but a lot of time he's like, what do these people want to hear? What do I think they want? So he go hard on things, but that's because he thinks that's what they want. But of course, the problem with going hard and going MAGA, so if Trump wins and gets this like strong MAGA support that gets him into the nominee, being a nominee, he will go to these rallies and people are going to be fervently shouting for him, and he's going to feel like he's really popular, really successful, and he's going to go more and more hardline. Problem is, he will just not get elected. Like, I don't care if you're pro-Trump, wherever you sit, but you've got to look at the reality here is that the further he goes to the right, the more he loses the centre. Now, he's never going to get Democrats. Well, interesting, there might be some movement on some Democrats on, say, the border. But generally speaking, you are not going to attract Democrats over by going more and more to MAGA. But if Nikki Haley loses out and there is no place for these moderates, there's some of those moderates, and I've heard vox pops from them that say, well, I will never vote Trump, so I will vote Biden. And you've got to remember that in terms of international politics, if you were to place Biden on the political spectrum in the UK or in Europe, he would be centre, at possibly even centre right, moderate right a little bit. US politics is not the same as international politics, and you don't have a strong left wing in the US. You've got the Justice Democrats, people like Rashida Tlaib and AOC, and people who represent a fairly standard left wing position, but it's not hugely like radically left. And we'll come on to this, and we'll come on to the messaging about that in a second. But there is that. But there's an awful lot of corporate Democrats, a lot of Democrats who are funded by big business, who are, you know, they're not small donors and electorate donors. They are funded by concerns, and they would not sit on the left, particularly in, say, the UK or Europe, compared to where our politics is now. What that means is that I think some in the the Republican Party might recognize that swinging to the right means they're going to lose a center. So what they have to do is change the narrative or produce this narrative that those in the Democratic Party are radical leftists. So people like AOC, those the Justice Caucus and whatever, Justice Democrats, if we paint them as radical radical left, like so radical left, even though like if you place them in the UK, there wouldn't be at all. But if we paint them as that, then we might be able to attract some of the centre by reacting against the left, thinking that this two-party system is polarising massively. It is polarising, but I think the Democrats are broadly staying where they've always been, and the Republicans are going more MAGA. And the threat is that they will lose the centre ground to the Democrats, especially considering abortion, right? So they need to then get the centre ground by scaring people that the left is radical. Traditionally, they've done that on abortion, but they can't do that now because Roe v. Wade has been repealed. And I was saying in this other video, if Biden actually goes hard on the border, he will take the win from the Republican sails and they'll have nothing to campaign on. They have to go back to, they come to steal your guns or something. A Second Amendment kind of positioning, the war on Christmas, all that kind of stuff, culture wars. They have to go hard on that because if they don't have the border and they don't have Roe v. Wade, then what do you do? So I think you've got to remember that Biden got the most votes in history. Trump got a lot of votes, but he didn't get enough votes to win. Now, I'm not entertaining that the election was a steal or anything like that, because that's pure nonsense. And if that's what you believe, there's no point having this conversation because, it's been found soundly in court. The evidence is there. You can't make up your own facts. It was not a stolen election. So put that to bed. I'm not bothered. If you believe that that's the case, then we're not really having a conversation. Given what the stats were from the last election, if it runs again on a Biden versus Trump, and if the economy maintains itself in a pretty good shape going into November, then Biden has, I think, a much better chance of winning by appealing to the moderates. The more and the longer this goes on, the longer Nikki Haley stays in a race, the more Trump will go to the MAGA extreme in order to combat Nikki Haley's moderacy. And that will then turn the campaign, the general election campaign, into a far-right MAGA against potentially a moderate Democrat campaign with the divisive the fairly popular position of pro-choice for the Democrats. I think you might well get a situation where Biden has an easier run than many people might think. We're going to be reopening old wounds, and you've got to remember that Trump has lost in 2020 against Biden and has lost in every election that has counted since then, and every person he's nominated has lost. So the form is good for the Democrats here, is good for pro-choice here. And I'm not as bullish, of course I'm not, from my own ideological point of view, but just thinking about the stats and the form, I'm not bullish about Trump's chances. I think he will garner a huge vote again and mobilize that MAGA base. But I think that is so divisive that you're not attracting the centre ground, you're not attracting the swing voters, and you're not having a rhetoric of inclusivity. He tried that after Iowa, I think. He said a really inclusive speech. You could tell he had been told to say that. It's not his natural kind of, he's combative, isn't he? And he's abrasive. He's not let's all get together, all lovey-dovey. That's not what he's like, but that's what he needs if he wants to win the November 2024 general election. If he wants to be president, he needs to be a unifying force to try and attract that center ground, but he won't be. And as a result, I think the Democrats will still win. Now, the challenge the Democrats have is that Joe Biden is old. what Joe Biden is luckily having at the moment is that Trump is also making a lot of mistakes in his speeches, and people like the Lincoln Project have been showing this very clearly. And they've a stinging advert that's just come out to show that actually Trump appears to be in cognitive decline. So one of Trump's biggest campaign tactics is to show that Biden is too old and in cognitive decline. The problem is he's actually exhibiting that, empirically himself. Like, we are hearing the things he is saying and the missteps, like accusing Nikki Haley basically being Nancy Pelosi and mixing the two up, or constantly mixing Obama up with Biden. All these word mistakes, making up words, and all the stuff that he's done, throughout since 2016, but becoming more obvious about that. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic. But essentially, you need someone younger than Biden. Like, Democrats would love it if there was an alternative to Biden. Someone like, my personal choice would be Jamie Raskin. I don't know. He's a great in Congress. He's fantastic. That doesn't necessarily mean you'd be a great president. He's good at arguing. He's got that legal background. So I would think Jamie Raskin would be great, but not sure about POTUS. I think Gavin Newsom, I know he's quite divisive for some people. A lot of Republicans don't like him, but actually he is garnering a lot of support by his appearances on television and his willingness to very strongly defend Bidenomics and actually come with the stats. He wiped the floor with DeSantis in a recent debate. So I think he's very strong with his persona, charisma, and knowledge and rhetoric. I also think Pete Buttigieg is pretty good in that way as well. But of course, being gay, I don't think he would succeed given the political landscape in the US still. Those are my thoughts. But it's looking like it's going to be Biden, and that's what we're seeing. He won the Democratic version of the primary, although it's almost slightly different. They weren't properly campaigning and there had to be write-ins, but even on the write-ins, he won. So it looks like he's going to be comfortably the Democratic nominee. But the challenge for him is losing some of that far left in terms of Gaza and Palestine and Israel. So people were writing in ceasefire on the write-in ballots instead of Joe Biden. I don't know how much that was a thing, but that's going to be a challenge for the Democrats going into this election. Now, I don't think that those people would then go and vote for the Republicans because they would be far left. They're much more likely vote an independent, which would be a wasted vote because of this very narrow two-party system, unfortunately. Because the Republicans would basically toe the party line on Israel, broadly speaking. That's my hot take on the situation. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what Nikki Haley does now and what the donors do. But it is a shame because, it does seem that so much of the base now is just so firmly behind Donald Trump. And I just don't think that's good for the world. I don't think that's good for American politics. And I think it's more divisive. It would be fantastic if we got back to like fighting over the middle ground in a more, traditional manner rather than going to the extremes. I don't think it's healthy to have another Trump election in 2024 for the American people. I think you would just find the American electorate is going to become more and more divided, and these issues will become so hyper partisan that there may be no coming back. Then there may be this like leaving the center behind, and this is why you need a three-party system. You almost need a left, a center, and a right, and fight it out there. But there isn't that, and there's no chance of that really happening going forward. Anyway, that's my thoughts. I better get on with thinking about the Ukraine war.